I wasn't hired to lie about cracks that could kill people. I was hired to keep bridges standing and strangers alive. That's the thought that kept repeating in my head on February 15th, 2025, as wind came skimming off Lake Superior and rattled the orange cones along West Superior Street. I was 40 feet under the Red Pine Viaduct, with a headlamp, a step gauge, and a wristwatch I'd rebuilt from a busted 1953 Hamilton 992B. The watch ticked like a metronome in my pocket, steady and impartial. My name is Darren Iacobi. I'm 34 years old, and I live in Duluth, Minnesota, in a small second-floor apartment above a Vietnamese bakery that opens at 6 a.m. sharp. I work as a field structural inspector for North Range Consulting LLC, which holds a multi-year contract with the city for routine bridge inspections, load ratings, and emergency calls after collisions. My mornings smell like coffee and cold metal. My nights smell like solvent and old oil from the watches I bring back to life at my kitchen table. Watchmaking is the thing that keeps me honest. Every jewel, every wheel, every spring must sit exactly where it belongs, or the whole mechanism lies to you. My boss, Robert Bob Methley, didn't look like a villain when I met him in May of 2023. He looked like a business school brochure. He wore Oxfords the color of coffee, a steel blue suit that fit too well to be off the rack, and the kind of smile that says, "I already know you like me." In the first month, he bought donuts on Fridays, handed out branded fleece vests, and joked about being the art director of a company that makes gray things less likely to fall down. He called me the watch guy after I fixed the stuck winding stem on an old Belova he said belonged to his father. He told me North Range was a family. There were, of course, red flags. The man never read anything before signing it. He called the DOT checklist friendly suggestions. He'd lean against my cube at 8:02 a.m. immaculate, coffee in hand, and ask if there was a faster way to say what we found in the reports. During a team lunch at Sammy's Pizza, he laughed about how, in a previous job, he convinced a developer to salvage a timeline by streamlining a foundation report, his air quotes, not mine. The table laughed. I didn't. That winter, Duluth froze and thawed in violent swings. The Red Pine Viaduct is a 3-span steel girder bridge over a rail corridor, built in 1974, rehabbed 2001. I know this because I carry the 1974 drawings with the city seal file RP74-1117 folded into a plastic sleeve in my truck. On February 15th at 08:17, with my thermometer reading 18F, I found a longitudinal fatigue crack marching out of a stiffener weld on the east fascia girder, near Station 2+86, southbound lane, bottom flange. The crack was 41, 3 mm long at first gauge. I use a Mitutoyo digital with a magnetized base, with a faint spidering toward the web. I chalked it, photographed it, photo IDs DI02HAWA525-07 through 14, and sound tested it with a hammer. It rang dull. I called Bob at 08:31. "Document it," he said. "Don't call the city yet." I had already texted Celine Arbour, our project manager, and emailed the Shared Inspections North Range inbox with the subject RPV fatigue crack immediate review requested. Still, I followed Bob's order to the extent the protocol allowed. Finish my sweep, take comparisons, and call it in before 10 Haben when traffic volume grows. At 09:12, a Canadian National Freight rolled under the bridge, horn moaning, a sound that vibrated the soles of my boots. The crack looked back at me like a cold eye. Bob met me on site at 09:28 in a long coat and leather gloves. He bent under the fascia, peered and frowned. He asked how much haircut we were facing if we flagged it for immediate repair lane closure, detours, press questions. He didn't ask what would happen if it grew. By 10:05, I had filed an immediate findings memo and called City Engineer's office at 218-555-0142, noting Section 6. 1. 4 fracture critical protocols. The city scheduled a temporary lane closure for the next morning. I recommended retrofit plates and a full ultrasonic review by an independent lab. Bob said, in the truck, "We're not inflating this into a circus, Darren." He put circus in the same tone I used for catastrophic. The circus arrived anyway, not because we called it, but because cracks don't care about PR. The next day, February 16th, 0940, Celine and I were under the West Girder when a snowplow rattled across. No drama, but my repeat measurements showed growth at the original site, 46, 9 mm. I logged it. Bob told me on speakerphone to double-check the caliper and consider variance. When I sent him a side-by-side photo with chalk marks, measurements, and my glove for scale, he said, Okay, fine. We'll recommend a patch and a 30-day monitor. Keep it calm." Here's where the money problem slithered out from under the rock. North Range's contract with the City Contract 21783C, signed July 1st, 2021, paid an on-time inspection completion bonus of $42,500 each quarter if all scheduled structures were inspected and reported within deadlines. A full crack remediation and lane closure would push 3 bridges into next quarter's queue, risking the bonus and potentially violating a deliverables clause. For North Range, that bonus paid for vehicles, vests, clever mugs, and, not incidentally, Bob's performance targets that fed his March 2025 promotion bid to regional director. That bonus was the church. My memo was a heresy. On February 19th at 07:55, in a conference room with beige carpet and a view of an iced parking lot, Bob closed the blinds and slid a red-marked draft of my report across the table. He'd replaced fracture critical risk immediate repair recommended with monitoring recommended no immediate load rating changes. He'd deleted my photo IDs and added a sentence, observed indications likely due to surface corrosion, no evidence of active propagation. I read that sentence twice, then again, feeling something inside me go perfectly still. "Where did you get surface corrosion?" I asked. "From the part where we're not getting hysterical," he said. "We patch, we watch, we keep commitments." "Darren, I need you to sign off as field lead. That's your title on this one. You don't need to die on every hill." "I'll die on the hill where people don't," I said. He smiled the kind of smile men give you when they're sure they will win because they always have. "You're principled. That's good for marketing. But you're not a martyr. Sign it. We're making a business decision." "No," I said. "We're making a record that follows our names after something falls." The first real blow came sideways. On February 23rd, just before lunch, HR emailed me a corrective action notice citing insubordination, disruptive communication, and failure to follow reporting protocols. Attached was a performance improvement plan, PIP, with goals like demonstrate cooperative spirit and refrain from unnecessary escalations, with weekly check-ins through May 1st. It felt like a trap with a polite header. I printed the email, slid it into a manila folder labeled Red Pine, and drove to 1624 East Superior Street, a notary service next to a nail salon. I had the immediate findings memo notarized, along with the timeline of calls and a copy of my field notes. I bought a fresh composition notebook, the black and white kind kids use, and wrote DI Field Log RPV on the cover. On the first page, if anyone reads this after something breaks, know that I tried to stop it. Then I got methodical. I moved $2,800 from my checking into a separate account at a different bank, so if North Range tried something economic, I could cover rent. I set up a Google Drive folder named Hamilton 992B Nobody, but me would recognize that as code for safety, synced it to my phone, and filled it with everything. Metadata stamped photos, voice memos describing dimensions, scanned field sketches, and the audio of 2 meetings I recorded because Minnesota is a one-party consent state. I checked twice. I bought a 128 GB micro SD card and taped it behind a framed certificate on my wall. I switched my apartment locks to Schlag encode and changed my email passwords. I took pictures of my truck's odometer, 134,027 miles, and the exterior, MN plate 6HZ941, so nobody could claim I hadn't been where I said I was when I said I was. Then I told the city. On February 26th at 11:23, I met Assistant City Engineer Mariah Wilcox in a conference room at 411 West 1st Street, 3rd floor. I placed my field notes on the table, showed her the chalked measurements, and said plainly, "My boss wants the record to say something I do not believe is true. I won't sign it." She didn't blink. She asked me if I understood the risk. I said yes. She excused herself, returned with senior counsel Jacob Platt, and within 10 minutes I was giving a sworn statement. The city issued a temporary speed reduction on the bridge that afternoon and scheduled a third-party NDT, non-destructive testing, for March 4th with Iron Range Testing Inc. I slept for the first time in a week. Bob did not. He called, he texted, he asked me to come in early tomorrow to reset and to think big picture, and to remember I had fans in the company. When I didn't show up early, he showed up at my building at 6:11 a.m. and buzzed like a wasp. I walked down in a sweatshirt, opened the outer door, and watched him through the glass at the inner door. He smiled, a little less brochure now. He said he wanted to fix this before it turned into career cancer. I told him I had already given the city my statement. The smile died inch by inch, like damp creeping up drywall. "You've made a mistake," he said. "You think they'll protect you? They'll use you. And when the noise dies, it'll be your name in the Google results next to disgruntled. Sign the revised report, Darren. Be smart." I closed the inner door. Through the glass, he looked all edges. He started a whisper campaign. I know because people who had no reason to tell me did anyway. A technician said Bob told him I had a vendetta. An office coordinator said he'd seen a draft termination letter on HR's printer. Someone told Celine that Bob had serious questions about my credentials, even though my PE exam results and my NHI fracture critical training certificates were in the HR portal. He clipped pieces of my behavior and pinned a narrative together with them like butterflies. But there's a thing about wearing a watch with a clear case back and a bridge in your jurisdiction that doesn't care about people's narratives. You can see the gears. The machine either runs or it doesn't. On March 4th at 07:30, Iron Range Testing rolled a truck onto the site. Techs in dark jackets unloaded UT gear and a phased array probe, set reference blocks, and got to work. At 09:12, lead tech Annette Yao called everyone over. The C-scan looked like a slow storm. The crack front had advanced beyond the weld toe, and an indication showed at the web-to-flange interface. Annette tapped the screen once, twice. "It's live," she said. "Active propagation. This is not surface. You need a closure and a repair." Celine looked at the screen, then at me, then at Bob. Bob said, "To nobody, to everybody, we'll coordinate." The city closed the southbound lane at 13:01, with public notice by 15:45. The Duluth News-Tribune ran a short piece that night with a photo of cones lifting in the wind. No names, no villains. Just the fact of a crack and the quicker fact of a plan. On March 6th, Bob called me into the office and fired me for cause, a clever way of saying I was out without severance. He handed me a letter with my name spelled right and my integrity spelled wrong. "You chose to undermine leadership," it said, "and to disrupt client relations." He used the word insubordination twice and culture 3 times. He asked for my laptop, my vest, and my truck keys. I placed my keys on the table with the detachment of a surgeon setting down a scalpel. "I've already emailed my documentation to the city and to our insurer," I said, "and I've filed a whistleblower complaint with the Minnesota Department of Labor and Industry Case Intake, WD 2503-1A187. If you need my field notes for discovery, ask my attorney." I didn't have an attorney, not yet, but I would by March 9th, when I sat across from Elena Kovacevic, a 37-year-old lawyer who'd left a big firm in Chicago to open a practice in Duluth with an office above a bike shop. She had a racer's calves, the kind that say a hill doesn't scare her. She listened without interrupting, asked precise questions, and looked not at me, but through the story until she found the joints that would bear weight. "You did well," she said. "You didn't grandstand. You collected. We'll file for retaliation under state law and defamation if they keep talking. Also get a police report for the morning he came to your building. We'll layer protections." That weekend, under a desk lamp, I disassembled a Seiko 7002 for a customer, and the click of the ratchet spring sounded like a lock falling into place. I wrote a statement for Eleanor, a straight, boring document with times, addresses, log entries, and the kind of photos that make people stop talking. Bob did not stop. He emailed the city that my unfounded concerns had caused panic. He left me 2 voicemails that said nothing actionable but sounded like gritted teeth. He walked past my apartment once at 2214 on March 12th, staring up at my windows, and I have the still photo from the Schlag app to prove it. On March 14th, a LinkedIn connection request popped up from one of his old colleagues, along with a message that said, "Heard you're difficult. My advice, apologize to Bob." I didn't respond. I documented. Elena sent litigation hold letters to North Range and the city. The latter, out of an abundance of caution, Mariah and Jacob had been clean with me. We filed a civil complaint on March 20th in St. Louis County District Court for retaliation under Min. Statamani 181, 932, the whistleblower statute. We attached my notarized memos, the UT results, and an affidavit from Annette confirming active propagation on March 4th. We requested injunctive relief to prevent North Range from interfering with my employment prospects. The city attorney's office, to their credit, issued a non-disparagement directive for all communications regarding the inspection. In email, Jacob wrote, "We appreciate Mr. Iacobi's adherence to professional standards." I printed that sentence and tacked it above my desk with a thumbtack that squeaked like approval. The fix itself felt like vindication. On March 20th, the contractor installed 38-inch ASTM A572 grade 50 retrofit plates at the cracked flange after prepping with SSPC SP3 power tool cleaning, drilling stop holes at 38-inch diameter with R3X crack length offset to relieve stress, and finishing with a fillet weld 516-inch using E7018 electrodes at 120 or 130A 22V. I stood a legal distance away and watched as the plates went on. Clean steel kissing, clean steel, heat blooming like a sunrise. It would need a longer-term plan, maybe a partial girder replacement. But for now, the bridge exhaled. They scheduled a follow-up ultrasonic for April 25th. I marked it in my calendar with a little watch emoji. The aftermath at North Range was not as tidy. Bob started coming to my building again. Twice, 3 times. Once he slid a note under the door that said, in blocky letters, "This can still be fixed." That was the night, March 28th, I walked into the Duluth Police Department and filed a harassment stalking report. Incident DPD 25-90341. I gave them the note, the Schlag photos, and a printed log of his appearances with times. The desk officer, a man named H. O'Malley, wrote carefully and nodded. He told me to vary my route, keep my head up, and call if he showed again. It made me feel both watched and safer. When a man like Bob cannot control you at work, he tries to control your reputation. He told a shared client down in Rochester that I was unreliable. He emailed a consulting group in Bemidji that he had serious reservations about recommending me for anything. I know because Eleanor obtained the emails in Discovery. Reading them felt like hearing someone talk about your face as if you weren't in the room. The counterweight was people. Celine called me on April 2nd to say she had given a statement to the city that supported my findings. She sounded tired and clear. Bob asked me to change language too, she said. I didn't. I'm sorry I wasn't louder sooner. Annette from Iron Range Testing met me for coffee at Yellow Bike Cafe on East 4th Street and gave me a printout of a waveform from March 4th with a circle around the crack front, like a teacher's red pen. Keep this, she said. It's clean data. She looked at my wrist, at the Seiko I'd finally finished, and asked about the bezel. We ended up talking for an hour about tolerances, hers in megahertz, mine in microns. There is a strange comfort when two people from different worlds are both kneeling to the same god of precision. And Elena was a force in quiet shoes. She discovered a slack thread inside North Range where a manager asked, "How do we spin this?" And Bob replied, "Make him look unstable." The judge didn't like that. On April 17th, the court granted a temporary restraining order prohibiting North Range management from contacting me outside counsel and barred Bob from coming within 200 feet of my apartment or my workplace, which, ironically, became Eleanor's office for several weeks. The TRO felt like a laminated card between me and his breath. By then, something unexpected had begun to grow in the spaces Terra had cleared out. Eleanor asked if I ever rode a bike for more than errands. I said not since high school. She said there was a Saturday ride on the lake walk, 12 miles, casual. I showed up riding a borrowed Trek that creaked like an old ship and wore a helmet that dented my hair like a cartoon. Elena laughed, then tightened the strap below my ear with hands that smelled like copier paper and chain lube. We rode slow past ice heaves and gulls, and when she asked about my watches, I talked for miles about escapements, about how the balance wheel wants to twist and the hairspring wants to hold it. So it's teamwork, she said, like litigation and facts. Like a bridge and traffic, I said. The positive turn wasn't a Hollywood montage. It was invoices, $340 for expert consultation on a bridge in Grand Marais who'd heard about my honesty and wanted a second set of eyes. $125 for repairing a teacher's grandfather's pocket watch. $1,800 for a 2-week contract with a small tribe authority up in Cloquet who had 3 culverts and a rumor about scouring. It was a stack of mail that included, on April 23rd, an envelope from the Minnesota office of the state auditor, with a letter asking me to interview for an investigator role on the public infrastructure oversight team. They'd seen the complaint, then the TRO, then the methodical folder and the way my photos had date stamps that lined up with work orders. "You appear to understand both steel and systems," the letter read. I put it next to the city attorney's sentence above my desk. 2 thumbs tacked down 2 corners and made a triangle of faith above my lamp. North Range cracked where all lies crack, at the weld where they thought nobody would look. On May 6th, a city council meeting laid out findings from a procurement review. Emails that implied bonus protection had trumped safety. A pattern of optimistic language in reports from the last 2 quarters, and an internal directive to avoid triggering lane closures when possible. That by itself wasn't evil, but in context looked like a philosophy rather than a case-by-case judgment. The city suspended North Range's bonus pending an external audit. Bob's promotion evaporated like breath on a cold window. He called me once more in violation of the TRO on May 9th. I let it go to voicemail. He said, "You did this to yourself. You think they'll remember you as a hero. They'll forget you in a week." Eleanor forwarded the voicemail to the court. The judge extended the order for another 90 days and warned that the next violation would invite contempt. The Duluth PD officer called to say they documented the call. I went for a ride with Eleanor that evening, air sharp as new paper. On May 14th, I sat at a long table in St. Paul under a portrait of a man with sideburns and answered questions from a panel about crack propagation, independence in field reporting, and what pressure had felt like inside my ribcage on February 23rd. I told them the truth. That pressure feels like being asked to call midnight noon. That you need protocols because someone will always be charming enough to sell you noon. I told them I wasn't brave. I told them I like watches and bridges because they don't respond to charm. They thanked me. I drove home past the split water of the lake and thought about how to regulate beat error in an old movement that was running a little fast, because even in the middle of an ethics war, the customer expects their watch on time. There was a final twist I didn't see coming, and it arrived on letterhead. On May 28th, the state auditor offered me the job. Infrastructure Investigator 2, salary $92,600 plus travel per diem, and a training budget for UT certification. The job came with two things I didn't know I needed: a rulebook laminated in my head and a way to use my stubbornness as something other than ballast. I said yes. I signed with a pen I'd repaired. That afternoon, I walked to the Red Pine Viaduct. Traffic moved in two trimmed lanes. The retrofit plates, now painted, matched the steel like a scar that had decided to stay. I stood in the gravel, put my hand on the cold girder where the paint was thin at the edge, and felt the thrum of 40 years under my fingers. I thought about how, in some city I will never visit, a child will glance up at beams and see nothing, because the beams did what beams do: hold. Back at my apartment, I wound the 992B. The balance wheel turned, the hairspring agreed, and somewhere below my feet, in a bakery already prepping for morning, the ovens clicked. I looked at my phone. A message from Elena. A photo of the lake, the horizon a ruler straight line. Under it, ride tomorrow 8K, bring the watch that doesn't lie. Bob's name stops appearing in my inbox after that. He doesn't darken my stairwell, doesn't test the TRO again. I hear through sideways channels that he's taking time and reassessing fit. I don't chase gossip. I don't need to. The record is the record. She, my fear, my younger, shakier self, said I'd be forgotten in a week if I did the right thing. He said it too, with a sneer heavy enough to leave a dent. But I keep thinking of February 15th, the crack chalked bright under my headlamp, the proof of reality shining no matter what we called it. She said she'd forget me in a week, but I'm the one who forgot him.